Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is sounding a very clear alarm. We are closing out 2023, a year we may look back on as the time that people started to truly grasp that the climate crisis is here, and it is already costing lives and livelihoods. From deadly wildfires to mudslides, devastating floods, and soaring temperatures, we saw it all. 2023 was the hottest year in at least 125,000 years, scientists say, as they warn that the world is inching perilously close to the threshold beyond which humans and ecosystems will struggle to adapt. In the U.S., cities in the South and Southwest were particularly hard hit, with Houston, Texas, experiencing the longest extreme heat streak of any major city on Earth. And drought-stricken Maui in Hawaii reeled from the deadliest U.S. wildfire in more than a century. Ocean temperatures hit record high levels as well, fueling hurricanes and tropical storms around the planet, with Antarctic sea ice at record lows. World leaders gathered earlier this month to try and address this crisis. They came to a landmark agreement to start moving away from the use of fossil fuels, the primary driver of climate change, though there are loopholes in that pact. Loopholes that many countries will surely exploit. Loopholes that will allow them, us, because really there's no them, it's only us, to avoid action. And it's about time. As experts warn, next year will be even warmer, causing more violent storms, heavier rains, more intense and frequent heat waves, droughts, wildfires. Today's show, focused on this one topic, climate change, is intended as a warning, an alarm about where we are as a world, where we need to be, the opportunities that exist, and the peril that awaits. CNN Chief Climate Correspondent Bill Weir has been here to see it all this year. Let's take a look at the year in climate crises.
Science tells us that 2023 was the hottest Earth has been in 120,000 years, shattering records in ways that are hard to comprehend and creating events that frankly exceed our imaginations. Who could have imagined 31 straight days over 110 degrees? Even in Phoenix, the rate of heat deaths in Maricopa County has climbed 25% a year for 2 years running. And desert cities everywhere are realizing the need to build cooling into public policy. But in the same mega drought, who could have imagined rivers in the sky dumping so much water on California that it brought Tulare Lake back from the dead?
If you'd stood here for the last couple of generations, you'd be watching the sunset over dusty fields of cotton or alfalfa or pistachio trees. And now it is waterfront property.
This new age of water whiplash means too much H2O or never enough across huge swaths of the nation, forcing farmers and water managers to reimagine how every drop is used or wasted.
This is the first of what will be many barges that can bring about 500,000 gallons of fresh water at a time.
2023 forced the economy to reckon with a Mississippi River too low to move food like it used to, and too weak to keep Gulf saltwater from creeping into drinking and irrigation supply. And when West Maui was the lush Venice of the Pacific, no one imagined how generations of water theft and invasive grasses would turn the capital of the Hawaiian kingdom to tinder, or the hurricane winds that would blowtorch the precious town of Lahaina into ash in the deadliest American wildfire in modern times.
It's just unrecognizable. One of the most charming, beloved port cities anywhere in the world is just scorched like a bomb went off.
But 23 also brought lessons in resilience.
There you go, man, right there, over your neck. Keep you
Okay,
nice and cool.
From people like Archie Kalepa, the Hall of Fame lifeguard, who is helping lead West Maui back from the ashes with love and aloha. And Heidi Lang, who lost everything to California's deadliest fire 5 years ago, but decided to stay and rebuild paradise.
My community and my neighbors and my friends and my church and my job was all still here. So my little village is here in paradise.
Heidi and her neighbors are learning from tragedy and rebuilding stronger than ever.
These are a little bit of them, right?
Tempered glass.
And as disaster forces us to reimagine how to live with nature transformed, breakthroughs in clean energy also abound by the day.
And you only need a tiny little bit of fuel.
That's right, yeah.
Scientists at the National Ignition Facility have repeated their success in nuclear fusion, nudging us closer to a world powered by little man-made stars in boxes that use salt water for fuel and never melt down.
There's still many, many technology jumps that we need to make, but that's what makes it so exciting.
But even if fusion takes generations, the two cheapest forms of energy in human history are already onshore wind and sun. And with a surge of investment in clean energy storage, startups like Antora hope to power entire factories with thermal batteries like this.
1,600 degrees Celsius. So this is hotter than the melting point of steel, and it's just a couple feet inside that shell.
I had a hard time explaining to my kids what nuclear fusion is, but this is just a hot rock in a box.
Exactly.
So 2023 also reminded us to expand our imaginations, not just for the worst that can happen, but the best.
The transition is inevitable.
Now, all them words that they just got through saying sounds very elegant, doesn't it? Sounds real smart, intelligent, sounds like that we're heading in the right direction, correct? But yet, no, I just go outside a while ago, and I look up into the sky. Keep in mind, today is Christmas Eve, year 2023 in America, and I see more streamers of more airplane activity going on up in just my little region. On average, we got 5,000 planes either coming or leaving America at any given day or night. Probably today, you can probably increase that by at least a third. And trust me, whenever you look up, with me being within 100, say 110, 120 miles from Memphis, whenever you look up into the sky and you see streamers everywhere, going in every direction that you can think of course, a lot of times it depends upon the climate, and whether or not you can even see the streamers. The sun's got to be in the right position. It's got to be a clear day that day, and all there are a lot of times that you can't really see them that well. But today I walk outside and it was like a flood, an absolute flood of chemtrails following in behind these jets that you can see with the naked eye. So all their words sounds very, very elegant, sounds very professional, sounds very alarming. But what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing and what they're doing is actually three different things. So it makes me wonder that they know what they're doing, the rich, the powerful, the elite, but in actuality, they're not doing nothing about it. They know that they're destroying the planet. Because basically, the poor people, the working class people, unless you're just fortunate here in America, they're not going to be, are not having the capability, the unfortunate aren't going to have the capability of being able to get in a jet and fly every holiday to Europe or to wherever from America just to be able to visit their in-laws. So it's the weak, it's the unfortunate that has to suffer along with those that could have done differently but chose not to. Just like all these big boats in the marina life, in the marina industry, do you think that any of that has slowed down? No. If anything, it is probably picked up. Because the humans down here thought that the party was going to last forever, that we could do whatever that we wanted to do in whatever format that we wanted to do it in, and there wasn't going to be no consequences. We can see the consequences coming over the horizon. The long-term effects that's going to not only affect us personally, but going to affect our children and our children's children. And I'm still not seeing. I'm going to repeat that one more time. I am still not seeing a movement in the right direction towards steering clear from fossil fuels. Now, you can get on TV and you can talk the talk all you want. You can be like Biden and you can promote, and I've forgotten how many billions of dollars it was towards the Green New Deal in some meeting here lately. But you still got people that are climate deniers. And this is one of the reasons why that you have the climate deniers, is because people are hearing the talk, but they're not seeing the walk. There is so many different things that I've seen on YouTube and on Facebook pertaining to higher standards of quality of energy today that we could have done already diverted over into, and we're not. I mean, whenever you can take the motion of the ocean in having buoys that goes constantly up and down, up and down, up and down, and convert that over to an energy source, how come we don't see thousands of them already being built today in being able to build these new energy sources? Like I said, it's just now reached a level to where they're beginning to recognize that it's a possibility that what we're doing to our planet is irreversible. But I'm still not actually seeing the movement involving the consequences. It's very, very hypocritical right now in the stage that we're in, towards seeing one thing while you're hearing something different. Like I said, if you don't believe me, walk outside. If you're in America, in continental United States, walk outside, look up into the sky. If it's a clear day that day and the sun's shining just right, the atmosphere is just right, and just look at all the streamers, all the chemtrails following in behind the jet activity towards how many people are moving, shuffling around to and fro and from. That is not part of the solution to the problem, but is in fact the problem.
Going to happen. We have the tools we need. We just need to deploy them.
And joining me now is the chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy and an author of the 5th National Climate Assessment, Catherine Hayhoe. Catherine, thanks so much for joining us. You say you're shocked by the climate extremes we saw in 2023. What are you expecting to see in 2024?
Good luck.
I would say that shocked but not surprised, because this is exactly what we scientists have been predicting for years and even decades. But when you actually see it in real life with your own eyes, it's different than seeing it in
overwhelming
numbers on your computer. So what do we expect for next year?
It's overwhelming. It's absolutely alarmingly overwhelming. And people wonder how come I put on my truck digging in. Well, guess what? The earth below the earth, as of so far, is still, give or take, around the same temperature. But eventually, even that's going to change. Like I said, eventually, what we're seeing right now is the melting of the glaciers that goes down into the water, in some places 2 or 3 miles deep. We're seeing the melting of the glaciers from the bottom end, that we have been distorted by looking at satellite activity pertaining to the upper end, and we have been tricked in thinking that the climate change was not.
Some years you will see a little bit more, but decade by decade, it's
was not really that irrelevant.
So, on behalf of the viewers that are watching this right now, what can we do to change this, to help?
Well, it's easy to feel helpless. You might say, well, I recycle, I change my light bulbs. What else am I supposed to do? But the way that each of us can have the biggest impact on our future is by using something that we all have, whether we're 8 years old or 88 years old, and that is our voice. When we call for change where we live, where we work, where we go to school, that's how change begins to happen. And I'm convinced that it can. We just can't do it alone. We have to do it together.
Do you believe that Earth will ultimately hit this 1.5 degree threshold of warming, at which it will become that much more difficult to struggle to adapt? And if so, what is that going to look like?
Death.
Well, 1.5 degrees is not a magic threshold, and neither is 2 degrees. The science is very clear, and in the National Climate Assessment, it talks about this, how every 10th of a degree matters. It's kind of like smoking. There's no magic number of cigarettes you can smoke, but you know that each new pack you smoke carries with it additional risk.
That's right.
And so what I know is that we have already altered our trajectory. We were heading for a world that was 4 to 5 degrees Celsius warmer by the end of the century, and now we're heading to a world that's probably going to be somewhere between 2.5 to 3 degrees warmer. Now, is that enough? It still isn't enough. How low do we need to go? As low as possible. And so that's why we are aiming as hard as we can for that 1.5 degree goal.
A lot of the coverage around climate change can be really discouraging, and I don't have to tell you how existentially a lot of younger people feel this crisis. Do you see cause for hope, though?
Well, when you ask young people, how do you feel about climate change, the words that you get are sad, angry, frustrated, paralyzed, depressed. And what I say is, first of all, if you feel that way, you're not alone. Over 2/3 of Americans are worried about climate change. I live in Texas, where a recent poll showed that even 42% of registered Republican voters in Texas agree that climate change poses a threat. And the second thing I tell them is that is a rational response to what's happening. If you actually understand what's happening, we should be worried because this is the only home we have. But what I do know is that our future is not yet written. Our future is literally in our hands. And I know also, in the words of the science, that every 10th of a degree matters. And so what that means is that every bit of warming matters, every choice matters, every action matters. We truly can shape our future. And that, to me, is the definition of hope.
Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate your perspective. Coming up, he's been warning us about climate change for 20 years after so much time. Does former Vice President Al Gore still have cause for hope? That's next. And then I'll ask a multi-billionaire about what big corporations should be doing right now to address the climate threat. Stay with us.
It's not just designed to look good.
It's melting the glaciers below the oceans, what I was talking about, that we cannot see, but we know these are happening because of the risation of the water that's causing coastal flooding. We know this. But you still got people that are analyzing the melting of the ice from the upper surfaces rather than the bottom of the surfaces. Eventually, once the ice is no longer there to resist against the heat, the oceans will actually start diminishing in their water table to the degree that that we'll start seeing the oceans start drying up, just like the mighty Mississippi, or some of the lakes, or the water reservoirs, the watersheds, the aqueduct systems up underneath our feet. We'll start seeing more and more and more of that verbatim on the 7 continents, because those are the land masses. But eventually, we'll start seeing the ocean that will reverse, because basically the planet is heating up from the inside out. Scientists has always thought that it was the outside in. It was all the carbon dioxide that was going up into the atmosphere that was causing the sun to get hotter. If that was the case, and I argue with this many, many times, if that was the case, we would not be able to presently go out into either of the 7 continents without getting massive burns. So it is not the sun per se that is doing it. Now, are we changing the upper atmosphere pertaining to the heat level? Absolutely. Is the heat level changing the participation, the water moisture, towards it rising even higher and holding more moisture, and then whenever it releases it as a deluge? Absolutely. We are affecting the upper atmosphere. But it is not the upper atmosphere per se that is affecting the planet Earth. It is the planet Earth that is affecting the upper atmosphere, and I use it as the theory of a ping pong ball bouncing from one area to up and then back down, up, back down, up, back down, up, back down. And as it's doing this, it's constantly shifting. It's constantly changing. And it's changing in the direction towards upper levels pertaining to temperatures versus stabilizing or going down. How come our professional scientists and people that study this stuff every day, how come they hadn't already put their finger on what's actually happening below our feet? Because whenever they talk about these heat domes, that is a heat dome of a bubble that is releasing that heat from the ground, and basically we're frying ourselves. It's just like taking a pan of water, putting it on a stove and turning the burner on, and all of a sudden you start seeing the water boiling. That's what's going to happen to planet Earth if we do not immediately change our direction. No ifs, ands, no question marks about it. That's what's going to occur. So whenever I talk about digging in, oh yeah, I'm talking about digging in, baby. I ain't just talking about doing it metaphorically, as far as getting away from the activity towards all the objections and all the people that was ridiculing me and demonizing me and dehumanizing me, in which that's part of it. But they've done the same thing to this man right here that costed him his presidency. Please listen.
He runs a nonprofit devoted to solving the climate crisis and somehow looking to the future with hope that maybe human beings can change. And joining me now is former Vice President Al Gore. Vice President Gore, thanks so much for joining us. So, Mr. Vice President, 2023, officially the hottest year on record, deadly heat waves, catastrophic floods, devastating wildfires, more powerful storms. We've gotten dangerously close to the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, beyond which experts say humanity and the planet will struggle to adapt. What do you think 2024 will look like?
Well, we still have the ability to seize control of our destiny. Here's the good news, Jake. If we stop adding to the overburden of these greenhouse gas pollutants in the sky, if we reach what they call true net zero and stop adding to the heat trapping capacity up there, the temperatures will stop going up right away. And if we stay at true net zero, half of the human-caused greenhouse pollution will fall out of the atmosphere in as little as 25 to 30 years. We have the ability to do this, and it's not impractical because we now have the cheapest new source of energy in the history of the world with solar electricity and wind electricity, and the electric vehicles reached 20% of sales globally this year. The batteries are now, we had one gigafactory several years ago, now there are 200 and another 400 being built. You know, a long time ago, one of the Saudi Arabian oil ministers said, we better remember the Stone Age didn't end because of a shortage of stone. It ended because something better came along. We've got something better now. We can do this if we just overcome the greed and political power of the big fossil fuel polluters who've been trying to control this process. It's time for people at the grassroots level in every country to speak up, and the good news is that's happening too.
So you say we can fix this. What needs to happen?
Well, we need to break through this blockade that the fossil fuel industry and the big petro states have been using to block progress. We also need to reform this UN process because it requires what they call consensus now, which is similar to requiring it to be unanimous. If the president of the COP decides that they don't see any objections, then he declares there's a consensus. And that's why it's so important that that person who's in charge of the process not have a direct conflict of interest. We have to make a decision to get past fossil fuels and start accelerating the shift over to renewable energy and efficiency. And, this is beginning to happen anyway, Jake. Last year, if you look at all the new electricity generation installed worldwide, 80% of it was solar and wind. In India, it was 93%. It's cheaper now, and it creates 3 times as many new jobs for each dollar invested compared to dollars invested in the old, dirty, polluting fossil fuels. So we have what we need. The International Energy Agency says that we've got all of the solutions that we need with proven deployment models to cut the emissions in half this decade, and we've got a clear line of sight to get the rest of it done before mid-century. So we can do this. The only thing that we need is sufficient political will, but as many pointed out, political will is itself a renewable resource, and these young people around the world are helping the world to renew it.
So that's the good news, that's the good vision. But what happens if the world doesn't act? What's the worst case scenario?
Well, the scientists who warned us of these mega storms and the floods and mudslides and droughts and the ice melting and the sea level rising and the storms getting stronger and the tropical diseases and climate migrants crossing international borders in larger numbers, they were dead right when they warned us about this. And so we need to pay more attention to them now. Here's one thing they say: if we don't take action, there could be as many as 1 billion climate refugees crossing international borders in the next several decades. Well, a few million has contributed to this wave of populist authoritarianism and dictatorships and so forth. What would 1 billion do? We can't do this. We could lose our capacity for self-governance. Already we're seeing people driven from the places they always called home, and we're seeing an expansion of areas in the world that are physiologically unlivable now because of the combination of heat and humidity. They're relatively small areas now, but if we don't act, they will expand to include most of India, large parts of northern South America, the Philippines, Indonesia, Pakistan, the list goes on. The survival of our civilization is at stake, and it sounds dire, but it is dire. But again, the good news is we can reclaim control of our destiny if we summon the political will and the courage and the moral courage to do it. There's a European politician, Claude Juncker, who said, we all know what to do. We just don't know how to be reelected if we do it. Well, this is why grassroots pressure from people who understand how high the stakes are is the critical element. And the good news, again, is people are rising up and demanding action. Your new CNN poll shows that more than 3/4 of Americans, including a majority, 76% of independents and more than half of the Republicans, support action. We just have to break the political power that the fossil fuel industry has exerted with its fixers and its lobbyists and its bags of money and its revolving door colleagues. But we can do this, Jake. We can do it.
Vice President Al Gore, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you, Jake.
How much will it cost the world to deal with climate change? And how can we get big business to step up? Multi-billionaire Ray Dalio has some ideas, and I'll talk to him next.
Experience Tokyo?
What most people can't understand or don't want to understand is the fact that it's not so much what will it cost to elevate to that, but what will it cost if we don't elevate to that? It's going to cost us our lives. It's going to cost us civilization. And they talk about the human the human casualty problem. How about all the animals? How about all the birds? How about all the sea life? These things are affecting all of that right now because of stupidity coming from our greed coming from humans. And it really just makes it's so depressing in seeing how things are being run right now and how blindsided that we have chosen to bring this upon to ourselves, because it was even foretold
Anderson and Andy, live coverage New Year's Eve,
going back into the Carter era, that these problems was going to originate, and nobody wanted to listen to it at the White House at that time. Nobody.
Welcome back to State of the Union.
Nobody.
Big Tap, where we are focusing entirely on our warming planet this hour, and one critical piece of that is big business and getting corporations on board with the goal of combating climate change. And joining me now, global macro investor and founder of Bridgewater Associates, Ray Dalio. Mr. Dalio, thanks for joining us. So you were at the COP28 Global Climate Summit, and obviously nearly 200 countries for the very first time explicitly agreed to transition away from fossil fuels. But I know you focus on the big picture, what's practical. So when you look at what it's going to take globally to fight climate change in terms of who has the money, what their motivations are, and what exactly it's going to take to unlock those funds, to put those funds to use, what are the answers to those questions?
I'm glad you're asking me, because that's the question about being practical. It's going to cost between $5 and $10 trillion a year, whether you spend money on it or whether it's consequences because you don't spend money on it. So who's got the money is the big question. And how do you practically do it? Right now we're spending about 1/6 of that. That is on mitigation. Mitigation, by mitigation I mean with alternative energy sources, making sure temperatures don't rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius. Those things that mean that it doesn't happen, climate change. And then you go to, if it does happen.
There's certain parts of the world right now that way before the Ukrainian war broke out over in Russia, engineers, scientists, politicians have been struggling with energy sources now for quite some times. And it sure enough come to the surface whenever all that activity began over there with a madman called President Putin, pertaining to his government wanting to basically annihilate a whole group of people. It sure enough come to the front then, towards energy sources, energy shortages sources, relying upon fossil fuel. And like Al Gore said, we have the big oil mega companies to thank for this. That as far as I'm concerned, a great deal of them need to go to jail. And our government needs to prevail by implementing newer standards, newer laws to force them to quit investing in more oil resources versus start investing in other resources. That should be mandatory for all governments to start immediately to these oil mega tycoons.
Adaptation. It's going to cost money to adapt, to build the air conditioning and the water, to deal with the high sea levels. And then there's number 3, the damages. So this, any way you cut it, is going to be a lot of money. The problem is that it's not economic. So if you have to start off by looking at who has the money, where you're going to get the money from. And if you look at that, by and large, I won't take all the time to break it down. Mm-hmm. It has to be economic to produce a profit. The largest source of money is institutional investor money, about $200 trillion. Only about 0.3% of that money goes into this issue. And so as a result, when I say institutional money, I mean pension funds, endowments, foundations, sovereign wealth funds that have to take care of the population. So right. Think about it as retirement people. And so the issue is, how do you make it economic to get money into that? And that's where the real impediment is.
Right. So you say you have to.
If you go to certain states, and I'm just going to pick out Oklahoma as one of them, they have profiteered off of the exchange of dragging precious resources out of the ground now for the past 100 years. Close to it. They even thought so much of it that they put one of them big ponies in front of their Capitol building that drags resources out of the ground. And now they have evolved in the past 10 years, whenever I was over there, I think since then they've slowed some of it down towards fracking, towards going in and getting natural gas. There's not an area hardly you can go to in Oklahoma, nowhere, without seeing natural gas stations everywhere. To where if you come over here in Tennessee, Northwest Tennessee over here, you're lucky if you can see one. And the only reason why I know that there's one is down towards Trenton, Tennessee, towards the natural gas station that's down there. They do have a station down there to where if you got a natural gas vehicle, you can pull up there and fill it up. Propane, whatever it is. It's just on and on and on about how that we have been blindsided in thinking that the party was going to last forever.
Have to make it profitable to get these investors to put more money behind clean energy. So what needs to be done to accomplish that? How do we develop climate-oriented investments that are both going to move the needle in a significant way and also generate a significant enough return for investors?
Yes, well, think about it. It's your pension fund. And now because it's your pension fund and you want to make sure you get paid, you want that pension fund to put money into investments that are going to make money. Now, there's a double bottom line there, we call. In other words, the do good part of it, and then also the fact that it creates a return. It's going to have to come from that double bottom line. For example, Bill Gates has a climate fund which is called Breakthrough Energy, and it produces a return from finding the new inventions. It may be solar, it may be other forms of invention. But also, we must recognize that that will not happen at a pace that is needed. And so we have to deal with adaptation. In other words, we're not likely to hit that 1.5 degree limit. And as a result, there are going to be consequences of that. Then that gets down to a nitty-gritty level of what does that mean? It means, preparation for sea levels rising, for temperature changes. And then that's going to change the world in ways where countries, much more than almost 80% of the world's population, is not living in places that will get those funds. So it's going to have consequences like migration and so on. Mm-hmm. The main thing I'm saying is that
not only that, but it's also going to cause the death of mammal sea life, and a lot of these foreign countries depend on that solely upon to their livelihoods
and so on. And then it also has to be the realistic look at how does adaptation to what's coming going to be handled.
And what do you think the balance should be between mitigation, trying to slow it or stop it, versus adaptation?
Well, if you were dealing with the whole world and you were willing to have money go to support the whole world with climate, because climate is a world issue, that would take money away from other countries, which is very theoretical. I think then you'd put more money into mitigation if those investments can take place. We have a very limited amount of time. And with that limited amount of time, I think it's going to be clear that it's going to be mostly adaptation. And with that adaptation, then you're going to get people dealing with their own particular circumstances, and that'll motivate money in. So I think we have to recognize it's mostly going to be adaptation.
One area that you're particularly passionate about is the ocean. You and your son Mark co-founded Ocean X, which focuses on exploring, researching, and above all, protecting the ocean. What impact is the changing climate having on the ocean beyond raising temperatures? And tell us more about why you think the ocean's so important.
Well, the ocean is absorbing about 90% of the excess heat, and it's absorbing about 23% of the excess carbon that's being produced, so it's important. It also has the effect of shifting sea currents and so on. So it's going to have a big effect. The ocean is our biggest thing. It's twice the size of all land combined. And so it's ignored because it's just below the surface. But it has an enormous, its health and discovery of what's in the ocean is not only very important, but it's also very exciting. But it's being largely neglected. So we're excited to help the exploration and bring it to the public's attention the way Jacques Cousteau did.
All right, Ray Dalio, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
Are skeptical Republicans starting to change their minds on climate change? We're going to take a look at the numbers and talk about what's causing that shift. Plus, see what GOP officials might be willing to work with Democrats on to address this crisis. That's next.
Experience.
He nailed it. At least 90% of the problem is the ocean that is heating up. But they're still not addressing the problem per se of what's causing the ocean to heat up like this. It's the draining of the fossil fuels. The fossil fuels was put there for a heat shield and reducing the friction of the platelets that's in constant shifting, moving back and forth, up and down, etc., etc.
Tell us about the status of that investigation. What would you...
They're still not addressing the problem accurately towards pinpointing what's actually doing this. The carbon dioxide going up into the upper atmosphere is only part of it. I've said that all along, and I'll continue to say that until the day that I die, because I personally believe that I have a responsibility pertaining to my grandchildren or my grandchild that's going to have to be raised up in this world that's now evolving and changing for the worse versus the better.
The source with Caitlin Powell.
Changing for the worse instead of the better.
The clock is no longer just ticking, it is banging. And we must make up for lost time. And we cannot afford to be incremental. We must lead with courage and conviction. And we must treat the climate crisis as the existential threat that it truly is.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm here with my panel. Congressman, how do we convince the American people to care about climate change to the degree that they're willing to make sacrifices or at least changes in their behavior?
You're not going to. You're not going to, because the rich are still going to be rich and the powerful still going to be powerful, and they're going to think that they have the same implemented rights today as they did before we discovered this emergency. You'll have to force it upon to them. And I've said this before, the only air traffic should be monitored towards the urgency of why it needs to be going on right now. And as far as you going and visiting your aunt or your uncle or your cousin or whatever, that should not be priority number 1. That should be like priority number 7 or 8 or maybe even 10. To be able to, even though you can afford to pay that $1,500, $2,500, maybe $3,000 or $4,000, whatever it's going to cost to go there and come back, even though you got the money, you should not be able to do that unless it was dire circumstances involving that particular move. That's my opinion, and I know it's going to offend a lot of the wealthy and the rich.
It's no longer theoretical. Now you're seeing wildfires in my state. You're seeing flooding in states like Vermont and New Hampshire. You're seeing people have higher electricity bills because we haven't had enough solar and wind. So we can make the argument that transitioning to a clean economy is going to prevent terrible weather events. And also America should lead. Why would we want China or Europe to lead in this $9 trillion market? I want those jobs in America.
And Congresswoman Love, we'll put up some images of the Great Salt Lake in Utah, in your home state. It's drying up. I mean, this is hitting home, doesn't discriminate. It's not just hitting blue states, it's hitting red states, it's hitting everywhere.
Yes.
What do we need to get people to address climate change more seriously?
This has been a big frustration of mine. When I was a member of Congress, I was part of the Climate Solutions Caucus, and I was in charge of recruiting other Republican members to be part of the Climate Solutions Caucus, because we realized that you cannot really make that significant change without both parties being on board. The problem with that is people need to decide whether the issue is more important or the power in Washington is more important. People that were members that really cared about climate change, climate solutions, Carlos Curbelo, Jeff Denham, me, we were all part of the Climate Solutions Caucus. The right beats you up because you're a part of the Climate Solutions Caucus, and the Democrats take you out because you're vulnerable at this point. You have to decide what's more important to you. Do you want members of Congress that are going to support the issues that you support, or would you prefer to have?
Right. A recent CNN poll shows nearly 2/3 of adults say they are worried about the threat of climate change in their communities. Almost 3 in 4 say the U.S. needs to cut greenhouse gas emissions. That includes half of Republicans. Are Republican views on this issue changing? Is there a disconnect between Republican voters, conservative voters, and Republican and conservative elected officials? Because obviously for years, conservatives and Republicans have just denied that climate change existed, or if it does, they say, oh, well, this is just normal.
It's part of the word called trust. And whenever this younger generation is growing up, realizes that various politicians, as well as the oil industry, as well as the adult industry, did not already put a finger on this, that they have been brushing it off, kicking it down the road, sweeping it under the rug, whatever terminology that you want to use, they don't have no faith in the system no more. They don't have no faith in what they're telling us today that they should have been telling us 20 years ago, putting an urgency upon all of this. And because of it, you have a trust diminished issue to where, especially the younger people, they don't want to listen to this because they know that they've lied to them for the past 20 plus years. What's going to stop them from lying to us today? That's their opinion about it. And because of it, you're going to have to break through that just about as much as you're going to have to break through all the other issues that's facing the culture, the society of as far as the inhabitants here upon to the planet. But once more, the Bible has already predicted that whenever you shall see these things beginning to occur, to know that we are at the doors. The Bible already predicted, woe be unto the inhabitants here upon to the planet in the book of Revelations whenever these things start to occur. Just like what I was talking about 30 plus years ago with the 9 tapes going to the White House, that was not treated on the level that it was supposed to have been treated on. A matter of fact, they didn't just not want to support the Windmill Ministries missions, but they tried to stop the Windmill Ministries missions. I was thinking about this just the other day about
I think the first thing
about where it talks about in the book of Acts that we see no Acts. I don't forget the chapter and the verse. We see no danger, no sin in this individual. It wasn't that they wasn't seeing no sin in me per se, in which I'm just like everybody else. I'm still fighting the temptations of the flesh like everybody else. But they was actually trying to create the bad news. They was trying to create the sin. They was trying to create the adversity coming from the founder of the Windmill Ministries. That's what has put us where we are today, and that was part of the wall of resistances that I was fighting against for the past 30 plus years. And now it's reached a point in my life at the age of 62. It's like, well, you know what? I've tried to help them and I can't. That's just like Jesus whenever he went up into the mountain, he looked down upon the Jerusalem and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I've gathered you together as a hen would gather her chicks, and you would not listen. And ye would not listen. You wonder how come the problems has originated over there in the Middle East the way that it has? It's because they would not listen.
Do and react to the climate issue in that context. And you do see still a great gulf between Republicans and Democrats on the urgency of this.
But I did think that it was so interesting in that very first Republican debate. They brought up climate change. There was a young person who asked a question.
Yeah, and Ron DeSantis kind of slapped him down.
Well, there was Vivek Ramaswamy wound up saying, oh, this is a hoax. He got booed by the audience and has now tried to walk back and like, oh, I wasn't saying climate change is a hoax. I'm saying the agenda is a hoax. Yeah. I mean, look, the politics are complicated on the right. It is not as much of a denial fest as
I've watched all these debates, and I have not heard one candidate sort of proactively say this is an issue that really threatens us and we have to do something about it.
Exactly.
So we're finding that there is a change in young Republicans, 18 to 39. Mm-hmm. This has become an issue for them. And I think the more we talk about climate change the way you talked about it, in terms of we don't have false choices. It's not either energy production or our environment. We can actually, if we can get our heads out of the sand and admit that we can do something about it and that we are part of the problem.
Yeah.
That's the way we get more people on board.
The economy.
Republicans like to hear that hey, these are not, the false choice is it's either energy production or the environment.
The economy may be one way to bring the parties together. You know, I often joke, if I say, let's bring manufacturing back to the United States, I'll get a Republican on. If I say it's going to be clean manufacturing, suddenly they'll hesitate. But we can talk about the reindustrialization, bringing steel back, bringing aluminum back. By the way, it's going to be clean. It's going to be less CO2 footprint than China. And so if we frame it as the economic opportunity for American leadership, you may be able to get
There's no doubt that if it's not a zero-sum game kind of debate where we're going to do climate action and that's going to cost you your job, that will go over better. But there's also the reality that lobbyists for the oil and gas industry just overwhelm the opposition in Congress, and it's like by 27-1.
Yeah.
And that's been a reality for a long time. You know, the climate in Congress isn't as good as it should be for action on this issue.
All right. Thanks one and all for being here. Really appreciate it. We'll be right back.
It's not just designed to look good.
We have basically been hijacked. And I'm going to use Walmart as an example. Most any of these smaller towns around in this area that's got a supercenter, which has a mechanic shop to change oil and do tires, and most of them now has a pharmacy, and most of them now has this and has that. If you'll get to looking at their sales is just barely under $100 million a year. Let's say right here in Weakley County, you got an industry or a business that is supporting $100 million per year that gets exchanged in and out of that building. Well, if you'll multiply that towards our 9.7% tax base, and what that comes up to, I ain't never added what $100 million comes up to divided into 9.7, which is basically 10%, but it's a large amount of revenue, tax revenue, that comes from these organizations. And it's not just Walmart. There's other big mega companies out there that may not be as many, but they're still doing very well every year. Well, they're going to protect the politicians and the law in that area. They're going to protect that industry because now it's become a predominant lifeline. It's their cash cow, and how that they get their revenue from the tax service to keep the lights on in the Capitol buildings, in the White House. So now we've been hijacked to the degree that we've been blackmailed, that now our politicians has to take care of those mega industries, regardless whether it's Walmart, regardless whether it's whoever, because they feel like that's their life source pertaining to the tax base. The thing about it is, they should have seen this 25, 30 years ago creeping up onto our lives, and how that these mega department stores have stifled out the majority of the mama papa businesses because they could not compete with the competition. And now that the competition has become as strong as it has, now basically the competition can dictate whatever price that they want to elevate their own personal, private profiteering. And it's really sad that it's reached the level that it is right now, because it's not just happening in America, but happening all over the world pertaining to big pharma or big mega whatever gets taken care of way before your smaller mama and papa businesses are being taken care of. And it was the mama papa businesses that gave us our life source to begin with. And now you're pushing that out the door. In the meantime, you've generated all these many more citizens that's going to have a job somewhere. Going to have to be doing something. But how can they do it if nobody's willing to invest in more mama papa businesses, because now they're competing with the big mega businesses that they know that they're not going to be able to compete with. It's really a sad state of affairs, and how that the rich protect the rich. Birds of a feather flock together, while the poor and the unfortunate suffer tremendously. And we're just now seeing the beginning effects of all this. Like I said, one day my granddaughter's going to pull at my coattail saying, Papaw, how come you didn't speak up? Papaw, how come you didn't say something about all this? Papaw, how come you didn't try to stop them? Well, Papaw is, by making these digital data videos that I'm making and putting them out there. But is anybody listening? And you also take under consideration the people that could be having a major effect upon to society. I'm just going to throw this out there, pertaining to prior President Donald Trump. He's still one of your biggest climate deniers out there.
Right. And that's how I got this story about him.
He's still influencing people in a negative way rather than a positive way. He's still the problem versus the solution to the problem.
Discovered a hole in the ozone layer above Antarctica, allowing higher levels of cancerous radiation to reach Earth.
Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State George Shultz reminds us that when Reagan was president, he faced a similar situation to the one that we're facing now. There were dire warnings from the mass consensus of the scientific community about the ozone layer shrinking. Shultz says Ronald Reagan urged skeptics in industry to come up with a plan. He said, do it as an insurance policy in case the scientists are right. The scientists were right. Reagan and his approach worked. Secretary Shultz asks, why not take out an insurance policy and approach climate change the Reagan way?
The Reagan way. Needless to say, the candidates at that time were fairly dismissive of climate change and the need for action, quite unlike Reagan, who, urged on by George Shultz and others in his cabinet, eventually supported the 1987 international treaty to phase out chemicals such as chlorofluorocarbons, depleting the ozone layer. It was ratified by the Senate in 1988. It came into force in 1989. 5 years ago, the United Nations announced that the upper ozone layer over the northern hemisphere should be healed by the 2030s, and the hole over the Antarctic should be gone 30 years after that. President Reagan's leadership is to be credited, but it also helped quite a bit that there was support in the business community for developing alternatives to the ozone-depleting chemicals, and that there was not a multi-billion-dollar industry such as big oil denying facts with politicians in their pockets. In terms of its mendacity, the oil and gas industry is quite comparable to big tobacco. They knew what the product was doing, they hid it, then they shaded the truth, fighting facts all the way.
The SO name that is known near and far. You are sure whenever you go for a drive that your automobile is alive.
You can find evidence as far back as 1957 that scientists working for the oil and gas industry were aware of the link between burning fossil fuels and the rise of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In 1968, scientists from Stanford presented a paper to the American Petroleum Institute, warning that rising levels of CO2 would increase the Earth's surface temperature and cause potentially severe environmental damage worldwide.
SO. We're changing our name, but not our stripes.
No, they did not change their stripes. In 1977, Exxon senior scientist James Black told the company's management committee that according to, quote, general scientific agreement, the most likely manner in which mankind is influencing the global climate is through carbon dioxide released from the burning of fossil fuels.
Which is only part of it.
Next year, that action would soon need to be taken, according to an 8-month-long investigation in Inside Climate News. An Exxon spokesperson insists the company did not reach those conclusions or try to, quote, bury them. But what the companies knew at the time and spent millions of dollars to hide from us is really quite stunning.
1982, 7 years before I was even born, Exxon accurately predicted that by this year, 2019, the Earth would hit a carbon dioxide concentration of 415 parts per million and a temperature increase of 1 degree Celsius. Dr. Hoffert, is that correct?
You were excellent scientists.
And this is not just ancient history. The Wall Street Journal just reported this year that in 2011, when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, convened by the UN, was warning of what would happen to the Earth if carbon emissions caused the global temperature to rise more than 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2100. That same year, then Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson's chief of staff, William Colton, emailed colleagues about Tillerson's feedback on a draft disclosure about carbon emissions. Tillerson wanted the words, quote, weather extremes and storms deleted. Quote, his view was that even mentioning a possible connection between climate change and weather was possibly giving the notion more credibility than he would like, unquote, Colton wrote. Tillerson denies the company misled investors about the climate crisis, but we know that the oil and gas industry is as credible in their climate skepticism as the tobacco industry was about their skepticism of the risks of lung cancer.
Exactly.
And while Exxon and other oil companies are currently facing lawsuits around the world for their deceptions, including from Hawaii's Maui County, where more than 100 innocent people were killed by wildfires in August of this year.
They need to go to jail.
We should note that lawsuit was filed 3 years ago because of the climate-related risks, including wildfires, that the island now faces. So the big question, can the world get its act together and solve this problem the way it did with the ozone? Yes, it can. Will it? Well, that depends on the degree to which politicians are brave enough to insist that the oil companies stop lying to the public and become part of the solution. In 1998, 52 state and territory attorneys general signed an agreement with the largest tobacco companies in the U.S. to settle dozens of state lawsuits. And that settlement has generated more than $159 billion to combat the health risks of smoking. How much do you think the oil and gas companies should pay for what they have done?
Exactly.
Is anyone
Preach it.
in the U.S. government willing to take them on?
Preach it, brother. Preach it.
Thanks for spending your Sunday morning with us. Merry Christmas. The news continues next.
Boy, it ain't going to be that merry, is it?
Is no ordinary
The direction that we're heading in right now. And we have seen signs and signs and signs all along, like he said, since basically 1956 or 57. And they even went to Jimmy Carter and said, these are the things that's going to occur. And their response was, get back with us whenever it starts occurring. Whenever it comes to this cancel culture, I actually think that the cancel culture morale has actually helped in influencing the elderly people in thinking that, hey, if we figure out that this is going to be a problem, we can turn it off and we can change it. It's not like a switch on a home where you can either turn the lights on or turn the lights off. It's not like that, even close to being like that. Once you have started a trajectory, and once society has now become dependent on oil fossil fuels pertaining to their energy, you can't just turn it off. You're talking about 7 billion people that's relying basically upon to the same resource. This is where we're at, folks, and it's really sad. It is so sad in what we're experiencing right now.
The Palestinians sign a pact on the White House lawn.
Supporters of the declaration are dancing in the streets.
Let's back up just a little bit. This is probably going to be educational here, interesting. Oh, right there.
Commerce in the world.
Sorry about that.
Istanbul symbols.
Each piece here, it has its own stories. You feel the art in each.
Well, let's go forward a little bit more. Right there. That ain't it neither. Come on. Right there. Oh. Oh. Right there. Right there. No, I can't get away from it.
We had CNN, a news organization that's inquisitive enough to do investigative reporting and reveal this.
CNN uncovered a long history of rapes and other sexual assault within the Coast Guard. I brought it up to multiple people, and they told me that he was too powerful.
I again apologize to each victim.
You found out from CNN that your case was included, and thank goodness they got it.
If CNN hadn't disclosed it, we might still not know about it.
Of course, we're going to stay on top of it.
I don't know what's going on with this thing. Let me go forward. Let's see what this is doing.
Unthinkable. Peace in the Middle East. Israel and the Palestinians sign a pact on the White House lawn.
Supporters of the declaration are dancing in the streets of that West Bank town of Jericho at this hour.
The reality changed today in the Middle East.
Enough of blood and tears. Enough!
The comprehensive peace in the Middle East happening now in Jerusalem. The scenes that took place in Washington are being replayed.
Go in peace. Go as peacemakers.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
30 years and 1 month later, an unthinkable day. An all-out massacre on Israeli soil perpetrated by Hamas.
War erupts in the Middle East.
The attack catching Israel by surprise at sunrise.
Rockets poured into major cities in Israel, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
It is a shocking and unprecedented escalation in the region's long history of conflict.
Babies slaughtered, entire families massacred. Moscow unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world.
Israel is firing back at Hamas with strikes on cities in Gaza after the staged terrorist attack.
We're all left with a crucial question to ponder. How did we get from here? Let us all go from this place to celebrate the dawn of a new era. To here.
Intense fighting is still underway.
We have just had a massive barrage of rockets coming in here.
To help us understand, I'm going to talk to historians on both sides of the divide and a former U.S. ambassador to Israel who has been involved in Middle East diplomacy since the administration of John F. Kennedy. Welcome to this Fareed Zakaria GPS special, The Road to War in the Middle East. Now, we could take you back thousands of years, but in this special we will start our focus with the closest the two sides ever got to peace since the founding of Israel. Briefly, it bears mentioning that the first steps towards Israel's statehood began in
He should have said the refounding of Israel, not the founding of Israel.
1947, when in the wake of the Holocaust that saw some 6 million Jews murdered, the United Nations voted to split the British Mandate of Palestine into two, one Jewish state and one Arab state. At this point, the population of Palestine was about a third Jewish. The Jews in Palestine accepted the plan, but the Arabs rejected it. Nevertheless, the British pulled out, and on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. A mere day later, the new nation's neighbors declared war, and Israel has been in a state of war or under the threat of it ever since, while the Palestinians have remained in limbo. But that sunny day in 1993, September 13th, brought the first real hope for peace. President Bill Clinton had convened Israeli and Palestinian leaders on the White House lawn to make a major step toward that peace, to sign the so-called Oslo Accords. The documents signed that day and in the days leading up said that the Palestine Liberation Organization recognized Israel's right to exist, that Israel recognized the PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people, that Israel would pull out of much of the Palestinian territories
after occupying and controlling them starting in 1967, and that the PLO renounced violence. The parties were exchanging land for peace. After the signing, the world watched stunned as PLO chairman Yasser Arafat reached out his hand to Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and stunned again when Rabin reached his hand out in return. Let's pick up the story there with two great observers of the politics of the region. I spoke to Ahmad Khalidi, who was deeply involved in the peace process for the Palestinians and is currently a scholar at Oxford. But first up, Benny Morris, an eminent Israeli historian who has written extensively about the Middle East peace process.
Rabin looked to be very reluctant. Explain that. Look, Rabin had been a soldier for many years. He was the chief of staff of the Israeli army. He had been fighting Palestinian terrorists for a long time and regarded Arafat as a terrorist. He didn't really believe, I think, in his heart that Arafat would change into a statesman from a terrorist, but he wanted to give it a chance, I think. And so he reached this agreement with the man.
Was it difficult for Arafat to get there? Talk about what he had to do to get there and shake hands with Rabin.
Arafat had to do an awful lot, and I think one of the misconceptions of this whole period is the degree to which Arafat was determined to try and reach a peace agreement with the Israelis. This started in 1988 at the Palestine Liberation Organization's Palestine National Council, which is the highest...
What year did he say? 1988. What year was it that 9 tapes went to the White House? Shortly after my birthday in 1988. My birthday's in March. There was some wheels that started turning pertaining to events. But because America did not support a true movement coming from the Windmill Ministries missions, which I'm the founder thereof, the person speaking in behind the camera here, it's resulted in catastrophe. Nothing short of catastrophe, just like what happened in Afghanistan when we left less than 11 days later. What happens to the Afghanistan people? They surrender. They give up. They give up and they let the very terrorists that they hated, or claim that they hated, take them back over.
Within the PLO, which took a decision which was the basis of what we call today the two-state solution. It was a decision to accept a Palestinian state on the areas occupied in 1967 in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Oslo was not particularly popular amongst the Palestinians. On the ground in the West Bank, it was very well received. But amongst the Palestinians as a whole, the imbalance was evident. The Israelis were not offering a state. The Israelis in Oslo were not offering a state. The Israelis were simply offering an interim period. In the Israeli concept of Oslo, everything was reversible. On the Palestinian side, it was seen as irreversible. And that was a fundamental difference in the way that both sides saw Oslo.
There was great distrust, especially I think it's true about both of them. Arafat and Rabin distrusted the other side. They felt that the other side was cheating. The Jews were busy talking peace and moving slowly towards peace, but at the same time they were building settlements. The Arabs were talking peace, but at the same time they were busy murdering Jews in buses and restaurants. So there was great mistrust. And don't forget that Arafat had been a terrorist for most of his life. The charter of his movement, the Fatah, called for Israel's destruction. And Rabin himself simply didn't trust these people.
Now, the Oslo Agreement was essentially asymmetrical. The PLO got formal Israeli recognition of its role as interlocutor. The Israelis got PLO recognition of Israel's right to peace, to live in peace and security. So whereas the Israelis got a very significant political prize, the PLO got a formal procedural agreement in terms of representation. So the asymmetry there reflected, of course, the balance of power.
The Oslo Accords meant that Israel would withdraw from the cities of the West Bank
and from the Gaza Strip pull out its troops and allow Arafat and his PLO units who had been living and training in Tunis and other places to come into the West Bank and to come to the Gaza Strip and basically take sort of administrative control of the main towns of the West Bank and of the Gaza Strip on the whole. And so there was sort of side by side during those interim years in the 90s, a autonomous Palestinian Authority governing the cities of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, side by side with Israeli military government, which was in charge of security for the whole of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It was an uneasy arrangement.
In February 1994, very soon after the Oslo Agreement was signed and began implementation, there was the massacre at the Abrahamic Mosque in Hebron, where an IDF officer belonging to an extreme right-wing Israeli religious group mowed down 30 Muslims at prayer in the mosque, and in the subsequent protest, the Israeli army killed another 30, changing completely both the atmosphere and this is very important, I think, beginning the process in which the Oslo Agreement was interrupted by significant violence on the Palestinian side. Hamas took upon itself to respond to the Hebron massacre with a series of suicide bombings.
Next, we will pick up the story at a major turning point, one that threatened the very existence of the peace process: the assassination of Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin.
We're going to go way, way forward here. All that's a history lesson, which sounds fine and dandy. I pretty much so know all of it, and some people may not. Pertaining to Arafat. Who was that other guy at that time over there in Libya? There's been so much that's went on. It's been quite challenging to keep up with all of it. Hope.
Their states every day, or somebody should be, and they're not taking advantage of it. I think it's a huge squandered opportunity for the White House.
And we'll see. Look, impeachment is on the table for House Republicans in 2024. We'll see if they go that route and see if President Biden takes advantage of it politically. Okay, up next, the Mar-a-Lago meeting that could make or break Montana's GOP primary and hold the key to the next Senate majority.
Now they're talking about politics. I don't care nothing about that.
For his purposes and his plans, and it's up to us to be in and stay in position.
Sorry about that.
Smile Active's whitening gel.
The all-in-one and done
has been good for business for China, Russia, and Iran. All have gotten stronger around the world. I dissented from the intelligence community's majority and said how China was trying to influence the outcome of the 2020 election, and that has been corroborated. In fact, the FBI has walked back intelligence and has said, no, China did try and interfere, continues to try and interfere in elections. Said, no, China did try.
Race there. So what is
how you went about deciding where to go after the door had been closed in your face many times?
More politics.
On the hook for, then it becomes very difficult to criticize each other. Because if it ends up being that hyper partisanship, then these issues will never get addressed. They just won't. And
boy, oh boy, America wants to politicize everything, don't they?
I have deployed 7 times.
That's a lot. He went on 7 tours. That's a lot.
From the bottom to enrich the already wealthy. That police and prisons solely keep us safe, and the freedom to crush dissenting opinions. But I believe in our version of freedom. We have a positive freedom that says everyone, regardless of your zip code or where you come from, should have the right to do more than just make ends meet. You should have the freedom to thrive, to dream, to achieve, to love the person or persons you want to love, make your own decisions about expanding your family, educating your children, or the identities that give you meaning. I like our version of freedom. What do you think? And I don't know about y'all, but I don't want a Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump or anyone else trying to hop out of the GOP 2024 clown car pulling the levers of change. So we gotta fight like hell, right? This year and every year, up and down the ballot, we have to organize and we have to consolidate and we have to build the biggest tent that we could possibly build to defeat this rising fascist movement. A tent that could hold the Cheneys and the Chomskys of the world. That is our challenge.
Soybean Agronomy Workshop, Thursday, February 8th at the Morton Center near Baltic South.
Let's go to see what was on the agriculture line. Oh, man. Can't even get them. I don't know what this ain't.
Down from meat to nothing but...
Man. Let's go forward again. Let's go forward again a little bit more. Come on. News report, Newsmax.
The only piece of mail that they're going to receive is a care package. It just warms my heart.
Yeah, there are airmen, young and old, that don't have anybody, immediate family, or, I mean, some don't have anybody that support them.
Me think twice about voting for him, even though I'm gonna cry.
You kind of didn't under.
If the Antarctic stratosphere stays cold, the polar vortex and the ozone hole within it will persist. And in years with cold springtime temperatures, the polar vortex and the ozone hole are large. Make no mistake, ozone depletion is not a natural thing. It stems from human emissions of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. In the early 1900s, refrigerators used toxic gases like ammonia and methyl chloride as refrigerants. Unfortunately, this led to fatalities as the toxic gases leaked out of the appliances. So the search began for a non-toxic and non-flammable chemical that could be used as a refrigerant. Thus, the CFC was born. There are many types of CFCs, but the two most common are CFC-11 and CFC-12. In the 1930s, the production and consumption of CFCs began to skyrocket. By the early 1980s, over 300 million pounds of CFC-11 alone were being released into the atmosphere each year. Then, in 1985, British researcher Joe Farman and his colleagues published their research on large seasonal ozone losses over Antarctica. Thanks to the combined efforts of the quick-acting science community, industry, and policymakers, the Montreal Protocol was signed in 1980.
It's something how those gases are attracted to a colder atmosphere, and that's the reason why they went to the north of the South Pole more so.
Like in Gaza City, they are very much not only often without medicines, even I will say that the UN and WHO, they've been doing.
God bless the charity situations over there right now. Got like over 1 million people that's dying.
Mobilization and turnout is going to be very, very important. You know, the thing that's working in Biden's favor is that these
more politics.
Influence. We've lost strategic deterrence. It's why we're being pushed around. I mean, China loves the fact that, the Biden administration essentially lost and ran from the Taliban, and that we're currently being pushed around by the Houthi rebels and being held hostage, Americans being held hostage by groups like Hamas. I mean, all of these things show that the Biden administration just isn't very good at this, and that's why China wants this to continue. It's good for them when America has a weak commander in chief, and I think that the whole spy balloon thing. We talked about at the time. We won't know for a long time just how much this degraded our national security posture, but we know that it did. We know that a transcontinental voyage of spycraft for 8 days uninterrupted, it was a huge embarrassment. I understand why the Biden administration didn't want anyone to know about it, but the fact is, it's something that should have been addressed. They should have been more honest with the American people, and the only reason that they're being honest now is because they got caught, because it was observed.
Unbelievable. Look, we've been talking about election interference, and yes, we know that it's happening from China, but I want to get your take on why and if it's happening within this administration, because there have been breaking news, a whole host of stories this week from Special Counsel Jack Smith, the Supreme Court, the Colorado Supreme Court trying to keep Trump off the ballot. I want to talk to you about election interference from Joe Biden's henchmen in the DOJ. Let's slip in a short break and then get into that. Domestic election interference with John Ratcliffe coming up on this special edition of Sunday Morning Futures. Stay with us.
Thing I would say is, if you're the president, you have to, again, get out there and make an argument that says, I get it. It's my fault. It's my job to fix it, and I'm going to. I haven't heard that strongly enough from him, and I think unless and until that changes, he will get all the blame.
Perception is reality,
That's
as
right.
you say, and it's true on every single issue. You can say, look, we're doing these great things, but people don't believe it.
That's all right.
And the economy, whatever. Kevin Cork, thanks so much. Still to come, an alarming warning for journalism from an ousted editor that goes well beyond the New York Times.
Well, we're going to end it at that. Like I was telling you a while ago, a lot of this has got to do with trust. And whenever you have a group of people that can no longer verbatim put trust in what our politicians is talking about, then you got a division that could be self-destructive. Homeland Security, as far as I'm concerned, has really let the American people down at the latter part of the 20th into the 21st century. And it wasn't just because of the 9 tapes that went to the White House in 1988 during Ronald Reagan's administration, but the fact that they have been so lax in seeing the true dangers that's now lurking in our communities and in our lives, pertaining to all the gun violence, pertaining to all the drug overdoses, pertaining to all the fentanyl coming over the border, pertaining to us being trillions and trillions of dollars in debt. And I could go on and on and on in how certain people of our Department of Defense has let us down. And I'm not just talking about 9/11. I'm talking about that even to this day, we are now looked upon by a great deal of the other superpowers, as well as the terrorist nations, as being nothing more than a substandard country anymore. In other words, they don't respect us, they don't fear us. And because of it, now they're doing what they're doing to us. Who's to blame for this? Who's to blame for this? The people that we hire and the people that we pay big bucks to protect us and take care of us. Those are the people that have let us all down. Those are the people that didn't do their jobs. Those are the people that should be charged for dereliction of duty and physically, not metaphorically, but physically removed from their positions immediately, because instead of them being the solution to the problem, they actually are the problem. And to think that they're still in power, to think that they're still in the White House or in these government positions, that's the part that's mind-boggling to me. And it's so alarming to think that we're supposed to be some of the smartest people on the block pertaining to the Americans, and we've showed our idiotic side towards not being on top of our game. Want to say on this Christmas Eve, God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless those who are striving towards a better future for tomorrow. God bless the righteous. God bless the peacemakers. God bless the people over in the Holy Land pertaining to the Middle East, as well as the people in Ukraine. I want to say a special prayer for the elderly, a special prayer for the children, and a special prayer for our politicians that now are beginning to awaken in understanding the dangers, the consequences involved in a group of people taking their eye off of the ball, and now they're just now seeing the problems. Want to say Happy Christmas to everybody, Merry Christmas to everybody on this Christmas Eve, year 2023 here in America, and God bless each and every person pertaining to the Christian movement, the Christian society that began thousands of years ago, that according to the Bible, before it's over with, the meek will in fact inherit the earth, which are God's chosen. God bless, heaven help us all, and shalom.